We have been talking through Oreos, okay, the last few weeks, and we learned in 2016 there was a study that was done to determine what is the perfect amount of time to dunk an Oreo in milk. And do you guys remember what the perfect time is? 3.5 seconds. It fully fills the Oreo with milk before it starts to get soggy. There's a process to this thing, and it's 3.5 seconds. Now, there's a process to discipleship also. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't take 3.5 seconds. It takes a lot longer than that. But the idea is that over time, Jesus calls us to this process of discipleship, a process of increasing faith, of increasing discipleship over time that He will call us to as we follow Him. Now, have you noticed that Jesus, He did not start out with calling His disciples whenever they came to Him and they said, hey, just trying to check you out, man, what are you all about? And He did not start with, well, you got to come and die. You got to be willing to come and die for me. No, He didn't start there, did He? No, He started out with just come and see. Come and see. In John chapter 1, verse 37, it says that two disciples, Andrew and John, they were following Jesus after their rabbi, John the Baptist, had pointed Jesus out to them, and they left John the Baptist and started following Jesus. And it says this, it says, when the two disciples, when the two disciples heard Him say this, they followed Jesus. Turning around, Jesus saw them following and asked, what do you want? They said, Rabbi, which means teacher, where are you staying? And He says this, come, He replied, and you will see. Come and see. He did not say, don't follow me unless you're ready to die for me. He didn't even know, they didn't even know Jesus yet. Discipleship doesn't happen in 3.5 seconds, does it? No, instead, it says this, and so it says, so they went and they saw where He was staying, and they spent the day with Him. And then look what it says. It was about 4 p.m. It was such a turning point in John's life that he recounts the time of day that he first met Jesus. It was 4 o'clock, 4 p.m. that day that I met Jesus. I know the first day that I was a Christian, the day that I was baptized, and the day that I put my faith into Jesus. I don't know that I could tell you the time of day that I made that decision, but John recounts the time. It was 4 o'clock. And Jesus starts with, come and see. But He doesn't leave it there, does He? He doesn't leave it there. He calls them to increasing faith over their time. And so it moves from come and see to then come and be my disciples. And then come and do, right? Do ministry. He would send them out to preach. And then later on, He would call them to what? Come and die. Pick up your cross and follow me. He would call them to more. But this is not easy. It's not for everyone. And if you're a Christian, if you are a Christian, this message is for you. But if you are not a Christian, okay, if you have not put your faith into Jesus yet, guess what? You get the day off. You don't have this, you can get on your phone, you can scroll Instagram, this is, you get to just chill, okay? You can goof off. This is a message specifically for those who believe in Christ, and that Jesus is going to call those people to more, and actually much, much more. Now, I do admit, though, that not all those who have professed faith in Jesus will accept this message. It doesn't happen. Many people are willing to come and see. A lot of people are willing to do that. And a lot of people are open to Jesus. But as we move from believing to belonging and then to becoming, we see that less and less people are willing to go there, willing to follow Jesus to where He's asking them to go. We see that in John chapter 5 and John chapter 6, We see that because in John chapter 5, Jesus feeds the 5,000. And it's an incredible miracle. It's an incredible day for everybody. And there's not a person on earth that's not down for that. Free entertainment, a miracle, free food. I mean, who's not going to sign up for that? Everybody loves it in John 5. But Jesus doesn't leave it there. John 6 follows. And that's where everybody's looking for Jesus because Jesus has left and they want more. They want more of that. And so they chase him down and they find him on the other side of the lake and they get to him and they're like, Jesus, where you been? Like, we've been looking for you. But he knows that they don't want just him. They want another show. They want another free meal. And he's not willing to just entertain the masses. He wants to call them to more. And so in John chapter 6, he does that. He tells them that they must make their lives about him. And that, he tells it in the idea of eat my flesh, drink my blood. And we kind of know the symbolism of that with communion. But he's saying, you've got to make your life about me. And they say, whoa, hold on. We thought we were going to get another free meal. And then in John chapter 6, verse 60, look what it says. It says, on hearing it, many of his disciples. Now there's three crowds. There's the crowds, there's the masses, there's the disciples, okay, the people the crowd of people that would follow him. And then there's the 12 apostles, okay? This is the disciples. This is that middle group. And it says, on hearing it, many of his disciples said, this is a hard teaching. Who can accept it? And it is. We have to admit that what Jesus calls us to is hard. It is not easy. It is a hard teaching. If you read the scriptures, if you follow Jesus at all for very long in your life, you're going to come to that point where you're going to say, Jesus, this is a hard teaching. I don't know if I can go there. I don't know if I can accept it. And then look in John chapter 6, verse 66. John 6:66. Look at the verse and what it says. From this time, many of his disciples turned back and no longer followed him. And it says from this time. It kept happening. From this point forth, many of his disciples did not make the trip all the way from believing to belonging to becoming. They didn't make it. Because what happens is less and less and less people are willing to accept that. And so as the bar raises for discipleship, less and less people are willing to go there. Now, those people that were close to Jesus, they wanted to become like him. And discipleship in those days was like that. If you were called to be a disciple of that rabbi, what you would do is you would follow them around. And that you would try to observe them and you would try to emulate them in the way that they talked, in the way that they thought, and then the way that they walked. Everything, you would try to copy everything about that. I had a guy like that. I guess you could call me his disciple, but there was a guy that was 4 years older than me. he walked. I tried to play sports like he played them. I observed him, and I tried to be just like him. He went on to play college football, and I even went to the same college and played on the same football team as he did. What he did, I did. If I'm going to be like Christ, if I really want to become like Christ, I've got to be able to look at Jesus and say, what is he about? What does he do? Whatever he does, I want to be about that. Whatever he is, I want to be that. Right? I want to look at him and see, what is he? Now, I don't know if you grew up in a Christian home. Okay, some of you guys did. Or if you spent much time in church in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. If you did, you might have seen this picture either in your home or in the church. Anybody recognize this one? Okay, yeah, I love this picture. This takes me back, right? This is in our church in Texoma First Christian Church. It might still be there. I don't know. But this was I don't know how they got his picture, but that's exactly Jesus right there. Blonde hair, white, blue eyes, that was Jesus, right? Probably not, but that's who I thought he was, right? Now, look, we don't see that picture a lot anymore, and maybe that's not what he actually looked like. All we have now is just kind of a look-alike worship pastor, with long hair, but we'll take it. But if you're trying to become like someone, okay, you're going to talk the way they talked. You're going to walk the way they walked. And you're going to think the way they think. So, how did Jesus walk? How did Jesus live? How did Jesus think? The Apostle John was Jesus' best bud. The Apostle John was his best friend. So if you're going to ask anybody, what was Jesus all about? You got to start with John. And John tells us, go in your Bibles to 1 John. 1 John chapter 2, okay? 1 John chapter 2, verse 6. And he's going to give just a simple sentence because we got to start with John. 1 John chapter 2, verse 6. It says this, whoever claims to live in him, okay, that's us. Whoever claims to be a Christian, whoever claims to live like Jesus, all right? What's it say? Whoever claims to live in him must live as Jesus did. We got to live like him. If you say you're a Christian, then he's just going to start off right here and he's going to say, okay, if you're a Christian, then you gotta live like Jesus lived. Okay? Well then, how did he live? If you start with John, the second dude that you got to go to is Peter, right? Peter. Just flip back in your Bibles just a couple pages to Peter. 1 Peter, okay? 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 21. 1 Peter 2:21, and he says this, to this you were called. He's talking to you. He's talking to Christians. To this you were called. Excuse my cough. Because Christ suffered for you, leaving you an example. That's what we want. If we're going to say, hey, I need to see how Jesus lived, I want to see how Jesus walked, we need examples. And so he says, here's an example. Okay, that should perk our ears a little bit. And so he says, here's an example, leaving you an example that you should follow in his steps. So what's the example? The example was this: Christ suffered for you. Christ suffered. The suffering of Jesus. That's our first example. That's where Peter says, this is what I want to hold up as an example of how Jesus lived. Everybody look at this. This is Jesus' example. And he says, look at first at his suffering. That's the first place we got to go, is Jesus' suffering. But it wasn't just that Jesus suffered, okay? It wasn't just that he suffered. You have not been called just to suffer, okay? Lots of people suffer. Lots of people have just random bad things, or bad people do bad things, or sometimes we suffer from our own bad choices, right? We have not been called to meaningless suffering, right? Everybody suffers, but it doesn't always mean something. It says that Christ suffered for you. There was a purpose in his suffering. There was a reason that he suffered. We know the full context of that, don't we? We know that he died on a cross, that he suffered to redeem you, and his suffering brought you back to God. It's his suffering because it was for the purpose of the kingdom. It was suffering for a purpose for the kingdom of God. Now, listen, I've suffered a lot in my life, okay? Unlike Taylor, who hasn't suffered anything, apparently, I have suffered, okay? I had a father that made sure, okay? Anybody get spanked with a belt, okay? You have suffered. You have suffered. Anybody over here? You have suffered, okay? Yes, I have suffered, okay? When I lied to my dad, he made sure that I suffered, okay? To this, I was not called. Okay, to this, when he says, to this you are called, okay, that's the suffering that he's not talking about, okay? I suffered, anybody identify with this? When I gorged myself on too much Mexican food at El Chilano's, okay? To this suffering I was not called, okay? I suffered one time. My wife, Logan, she had made some dinner and she was pouring it into a bowl. And it just looked, I had a certain look. And so I said, sometimes a word just comes out of your mouth. And I said, that looks like the devil puked in a bowl. I suffered for that comment. To this, I was not called. That's the type of suffering I was not called to, okay? To this you were called. What is this? To what? Look what he says next in 1 Peter 2:22. 2:22, he says, he committed no sin, and no deceit was found in his mouth. Look at verse 23. When they hurled insults at him, he did not retaliate. Oh, how we need this. We're going to get to that in a few weeks. But we need to hear this. He did not retaliate. When he suffered, he made no threats. Instead, why? Why can he be like this? How can he suffer without retaliating, without threatening, without speaking? How can he just endure this? He says in verse 23, look at it. Instead, he entrusted himself, not to himself, not to his own words, not to his own efforts. He entrusted himself to him who judges justly, to God. He entrusted himself to God. Now, if that's what John and Peter says that Jesus is all about, maybe the next logical thing is to see who said about Jesus. You go John, then you go Peter. Who do you got to go to next? Jesus. Let's go to Jesus and see what he said he's all about. Because Jesus would say something that is wildly, I don't know if it's inappropriate, but it definitely shocked people. Jesus would say something so shocking that if anybody was walking by and they heard that, they would turn their head. What did he say? What did Jesus, what's this guy talking about? This might be the most shocking thing that Jesus ever said about discipleship. But it also might be the most significant thing and the most significant key to experiencing the best life possible. Now, it's not shocking to us because, first of all, we've heard it and read it 1,000 times already. But to them in their culture, hearing it for the first time, they would have created gasps in the crowd. He's going to reference one of the most gruesome and shameful execution methods in that day. Nobody joked about this stuff. Nobody hung pictures of this stuff on their walls. Nobody wore necklaces with this stuff around their neck. Okay? It was offensive. It was an awful subject. And Jesus just came right out and said it. In Matthew 16. You got to go with me. Go to Matthew chapter 16. Matthew chapter 16, verse 24. It says this, "Then Jesus said to his disciples, 'Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me.'" Guys, the Romans used the cross to shame people. It was a way to humiliate people as they executed them. They would strip them naked. They would be naked, hanging on the cross. And the Romans wouldn't just do this on some back, field. They put them on a highway. And so they would be hanging there naked on a highway that all these people would have to travel and look. And they didn't die like Jesus died. Jesus died really quickly because he was beaten to death before. They would take them 2 or 3 days to die. And so you would hang there naked, suffocating for 2 or 3 days along a highway. And people would walk by and they would spit on you. It was awful. And Jesus just comes out and says that whoever wants to be his disciple must take up their cross. But by doing this, Jesus will say that you will find what true life is. Look at the next verse in Matthew 16:25. It says, "For whoever wants to save their life," what? "Will lose it. But whoever loses their life for me," there's a purpose, "will find it." Jesus says that by losing our life, that we find true life. This is so countercultural, isn't it? This doesn't make sense to most people, that by losing your life, by pouring out your life, you're going to find life. But this is how we are designed. And Jesus knows that because he's the one that made you. And the problem is that this is a hard teaching. Jesus, this is a hard teaching. Who can accept it? I don't know if I can accept it. This is one of those times where you read this and he says, you have to deny yourself and live for something bigger than yourself. Not many people will even consider it. But really though, we know it's true. We do. We understand that, don't we? Because we know that the idea of pouring out your life is how we find life. Because look at this. At the end of somebody's life, when they are dying, when they're in the mode of dying, they're not lying down in bed asking somebody to bring their softball trophy to them so that they can hold it and look at it one more time, are they? They're not asking somebody, hey, would you go to my garage, take my keys to my muscle car, and I just want to feel the rumble of it with just one more time. It was my joy in life. That's the thing I want to go out listening to. No. So they're not asking you to go, hey, would you go print out a printout of my 401k and let me look at the beauty of what I've acquired? Nobody is doing that. What are they doing? At the end of your life, who do you want there? You want the people that you loved and that loved you. It's the people that matter. And it's only the people that you poured your life into, that you poured your life out for, that are going to be there. They want to know that they made a difference in somebody's life. And they want to be reassured that they were loved. And if they did not, if they were not a loving person, what happens in those moments? Typically, or very commonly, what will happen are apologies. They want to make it right at the end of their life. Fathers will apologize to their sons and daughters, saying things like, I was not the father that you wanted or needed, but I always loved you. You will see husbands apologizing to their wives, asking them for forgiveness for the things that they didn't do. And those apologies are never about the lack of making more money. They're never about, man, I'm sorry I didn't get you a better hotel on those vacations that we went to. It's not about that. It's about the time that they didn't spend, or the love that they didn't give, or the mercy they didn't show, or the patience they didn't have. Yes, we already know what Jesus said about this is true. Because we know that a life is not measured by what you have, but by how it was poured out. You find life when you pour yours out. But here's the thing. If you're still in that text in Matthew chapter 6, just back up just a few verses. Just scroll up to chapter 16, verse 21. Because we got to see, why was Jesus saying this in the first place? Why did he make that statement? We'll look in verse 21. It says, from that time on, okay? From that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and he must suffer. He must go, he must suffer many things at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed on the third day, raised to life. Now, his disciples who are hearing this, they don't really understand it all the way yet. But he's telling them that life cannot happen unless he suffers. We must suffer. Now, we all know we are going to suffer one way or another. All of us suffer. We just get to choose if it counts or not. And so he's saying, I must suffer. But again, like I said, this goes against conventional wisdom. We don't think like that naturally. We tend to think that a good life happens only when I'm comfortable. Comfort is the goal of almost everybody that you know, and so it's no surprise what happens next in this text. No, none of us are surprised when Jesus says, hey, I must go suffer and I must go die. What is Peter gonna say here? And so Peter, look, in verse 22, Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. Never, Lord, he said, this shall never happen to you. Peter's just trying to protect Jesus. He's trying to do the right thing. He's trying to protect Jesus. He has no idea that if Peter stops Jesus, if Peter's able to talk Jesus out of going to the cross, he has no idea that he has now just assured his own place in hell and the whole world's damnation to hell. This is a key moment in world history. And Peter is tempting Jesus. He's not trying to. He's just trying to go after comfort. He's just trying to keep the status quo. He thinks what he's doing is good. And isn't that the case with all of us? Being comfortable is not evil, right? But Peter is asking Jesus to calm down a little bit. But if he talks him out of the cross, the whole world is lost. And that is why Jesus was so harsh in that moment with Peter. Look what he says to Peter. Jesus turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan." It's not a joke. We joke about it, right? I've joked about it. But it's not a joke. Because in that moment, if Jesus is talked out, I'm going to hell. Because now I have to pay for my sin for eternity. And he says, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me, and you don't have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns." Because that's what's natural for us. That's what's natural for humans. You're thinking like a person, but you're naturally thinking like that, but we're not designed to think like that. Anyone who chooses comfort over kingdom has short-sighted vision. And anyone who's not willing to suffer for the kingdom is missing out on the real life that Jesus offers them. All of us are called. Every person on the planet is called to be like Jesus, but it's hard. And only a few people are dedicated enough to pursue that kind of life. Paul wrote about this. John, Peter, Jesus. Let's end with Paul. He wrote a sentence that I believe is one of the most inspiring sentences that he ever wrote. It hangs in front of me, in front of my face, as a huge challenge and a calling on my life. And he writes in Philippians chapter 3 that everything in this world, the best things that this world has to offer, he says, are garbage compared to what Christ has to offer. And then in Philippians chapter 3, verse 10, Philippians 3:10 and 11, it says this. Excuse me. He says, "I want to know Christ." Yes, I do too. I do too. I want to know Christ. Keep going. Yes, to know the power of his resurrection. Yes. Yes, I'm applauding Paul. Yes, I want to know Jesus, and I want that power in my life too. That power that raised him from the dead, I want that power in my life too. Keep going, Paul. Preach it. And participation in his sufferings. Whoa, hold on. That's not, hold on. Stop while you're ahead, Paul. And participation in his sufferings, becoming like him in his death, and so somehow attaining to the resurrection of the dead. To know Christ, to know the power of his resurrection, to have real intimacy with Jesus, and the power and life that comes with that, we have to be willing to suffer like Christ suffered. There cannot be a resurrection without a death, and there cannot be life without suffering. According to John, according to Peter, according to Jesus, according to Paul, to pick up our cross and deny ourselves daily means that we have to be willing to suffer. We're not going out looking for suffering. It's not what we're saying. That's not what any of these guys are saying. But we have to be willing. We have to be willing to suffer. And guys, we could ask, there's a sentence, there could be 1,000 of these sentences after this. Willing to suffer how? There could be 1,000, but look at these. Are you willing to surrender control and priorities? I think that one probably comes to the crux of what this whole life is. Are you willing to surrender control and priorities? I mean, what does this look like? I think at the very base level, it means, are you willing to get up and read the Word? And are you willing to spend time in prayer? I don't know of another habit in your life that will do more for you than consistently reading God's Word and praying. That will transform your life. And if we're talking about suffering here, maybe sometimes just suffering is just being willing to get up a little early. Are you willing to give sacrificially? Tithing is not commanded in the New Testament. You won't find it. But giving sacrificially is. I will always tithe. Me and my family, we will always tithe. Why? 2 things. Because it puts trust in Jesus like nothing else. When I'm tithing, I am trusting that God will provide. Tell me another way that you can show trust in Jesus better than giving 10% of everything. It's not commanded. But it's said the tithe is holy in the Old Testament, and it's given as an example. Therefore, I'm just going to do that. So for me, that's where it is. Maybe for you, it's not tithing. Maybe it's something else, but it's got to be sacrificial. If you're going to trust in Jesus, you have to give. And I know we hate preachers standing up here saying, because I get my check from what you guys give. I get it. I understand it. It sounds so hypocritical, doesn't it? But I'm telling you, it's about trust. It's about trust. And the other reason is this, that it forces me to sacrifice my desires for Christ's desires. Hey, if you're giving 10% of your income away, that's significant. You get to looking at it like, golly, we could have a nicer house. Oh, man, we could have a way better car. Oh, look at the vacation we could go on. It forces me to sacrifice my control and my priorities. Are you willing to suffer? Are you willing to give up your sin? Guys, when we're hiding secret sin, we are slaves to it. But when you are willing to confess your sin to somebody that you trust, all of a sudden the shackles of sin start coming off. But it's not an easy thing, is it? It can be a hard thing. Are you willing to quietly endure hardship? When Jesus was being accused, he remained silent, to Pilate's astonishment. Why? Because he trusted in God. It says it. He trusted in the one who justly judges. The more you trust God, the less you have to pitch fits about not getting what you want The more you trust God, the less you have to feel the need to speak up and to cause trouble in the community. And are you willing to serve with humility? Those people who are quick to see a need and quick to serve humbly, those are the people that we celebrate. Guys, we could go on and on about what it means to suffer through denying ourselves, picking up our cross, and following Jesus. But if our lives are all about us, there will always come a time where we will find that we are not enough to fulfill our lives. Jesus' call to discipleship was for everybody, but only a few will respond to this level of trust. Let me end by saying this. We all suffer in life. All of us suffer. But we get to choose if that suffering will mean anything. If we suffer for Christ and His kingdom, it has purpose. It has meaning. Jesus went to the cross and suffered to give us life. Will you follow Him? Will you become like Him in His suffering? Let me pray.